Dr. Yang for his very nice talk.
接下来时间会来到我们论坛的一些对话哈。那我们接下来的时间安排，会由郝凤鸣郝副校长来担任我们这个场次的一个主持。那我们邀请今天参与我们整个论坛活动的演讲者来跟大家分享有关于我们接下来的一些对话。那目前就开放。与会的伙伴们提出相关的一些意见讨论。那我们把这样的主持活动交给郝副校长。
好，我们三金阁教授还有廖老师哈，还有我们今天的两位报告人哈，以及我们陈永文老师。那我们现在就是进行到最后一场哈，应该是非常重要的一个部分哦。那我想我们待会用的语言就比较自由，的一个方式。那如果有需要的话，可能廖老师再麻烦翻译给那个三军阁教授来。让他了解我所说的一个内容。好，那我想我就跟那个陈老师共同来主持哈。那我先开那个简单的讲1分钟哈，大概我今天的主要的一个感想哈。那我们今天非常难得有这么多的贵宾那来参与我们今天的讨论。那事实上呢，其实我们最在意的还是怎么样做。怎么样做？那自己怎么做的话，我觉得应该從4个面向来问。第一个面向应该是从科学面或科技面 （scientific aspect） 的这一面哈，就是从科学面来看的。也就是说，我们不管是在研究或者我们中心的活动、学校活动的部分，大概都是以科学为基础的，这属于科技面的部分哈。这个是最基本的。那第二个面向应该是社会面。社会面的话，它是一个场域，是一个场域，就是我们怎么样去运用我们所知道的，然后可以让我们彼此间的互动的话产生效果，产生效果哈。那这里面就相当多，包括刚刚2位医师提到的那个协助病人，还有就是改变他们的行为、健康习惯，还有我们怎么样调试。会怎么样调试？以社区的部分如何来活动？我想这个是在社会面，也是说如何让我们的人呢为主体的，让他们的生活福祉的话可以提升。这是第二层，这是场域。第三个很重要的部分是属于经济面，包括了那个绿色金融然后绿色经济就是让我们的经济面呢可以的跟我们气候变迁的部分呢可以结合在一起，是属于在那个 economic 的这个面向的部分呢，我们那特别是刚刚讲的那个 financial 那这个部分的话都会有相关。那因为这个涉及到那个社会的整体资源要怎么样来调配问题，所以这个在第3个面向的话也相当的重要，等于是来保护我们的发展的一个屋顶等于一个那个大的一个罩子。另外一个罩子呢，大概就是治理。就是怎么样来管理这边的秩序，这边秩序，那这个的话就涉及到地方政府的治理，包括了中央政府的治理。我想的话，主要是从这4个面向的部分的话，来产生行为的改变，让我们的气候变迁这个议题地球暖化的这个议题的话，可以得到那个疏解，然后可以让我们比较共同的来努力的一个共同努力的一个方向。那接下来的话，我们就开放给大家呢。可以来自由讨论。
Actually, I don't have comment, but I have question for Professor Singer. So I'm actually very interested in the last part of your talk. That's how to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So can you tell us more? What is the current situations of, I mean, in terms of outcome? I know there are quite a number of countries are doing similar things. And so what is the current results or outcome? And you also mentioned that pumping the carbon dioxide under the 1 kilometers of the sea level, right? I mean the seabed. So will it I don't know, because I'm not a geoscientist. I don't know whether it will affect the stabilities of the rocks layers, making earthquake more frequent or whatever, which I'm not quite sure and familiar with. So can you tell us more on that?
Those are all really good questions. Thank you for those. So the direct air capture is a well-known technology. And there are a number of companies around the world that are working on this. The challenges with it are primarily cost right now. And the cost is mainly the energy that's required to do this. But it's actually very well known, the chemical reactions to do it. Basically, you're using an ammonia solution to capture the CO2. And then you have to remove that. You have to separate that out again. But so Carbon Engineering is one of the companies, and it's located in British Columbia, that's doing this. And so but there are other ways of doing it other than using liquid solutions. There are also some membrane processes and other approaches. But basically, all of them are quite energy intensive. So it's how to couple renewable energy to the process of direct air capture. But then the pumping the CO2 into the basalt, right? So actually fossil fuel companies do this all the time. They drill that far, no big deal, no problem. You know, to them, that's second nature when they're drilling for oil in the seabed. And so actually, we're also partnering with some of the oil companies to take advantage of their technologies and understanding of how to do this. So that's not as, and there are special ships that do this, and we're developed partnerships with Japan, which one of their research vessels is very good at deep sea drilling, and also with some of the oil companies. In terms of special ships. In terms of the stability of the rock layers, that's a really good question. And part of the project is looking into that explicitly. And it turns out that there are a lot of pores. There's a lot of, do you have basalt here? Are any of your mountains actively volcanic still? So if you've seen basalt on the surface of the earth, it has a lot of holes in it, right? So also the basalt is quite porous in the deep sea as well. Maybe not quite so much as here because it doesn't explode into the air, but explode. And so, but they specifically looked at that. And if you're in certain areas, you know, really close to subduction zones, for example, at the edge of plates, you wouldn't want to be there, right? But you want to be moved away from there where it's a more stable environment. And so the results of the work that they've done have shown that at least where they're planning to do this, it's not a problem. It's not a problem, but it's something to think about. The other thing with respect to that is, will the pores clog? Will the carbonate, when it's deposited, close up the pores so that you can't get the CO2 through it? And it's actually it looks like it's a process of precipitation and dissolution and moving along. And so a particular drill hole wouldn't be active for eternity. You know, you would need to probably move to different locations every so many years, right? So, but those are all very good questions. Yeah. And actually in Iceland, they've actually done this because Iceland is a volcanic island, right? And so there's lots of basalt right on the surface of the island. And so they've actually, and they use geothermal for heat in Iceland. So they've actually used some of their boreholes for the geothermal, and pumped CO2 down and followed the chemical reaction. So it's also sort of a proven technology, but the chemical characteristics of basalt vary, you know, so you also need to understand maybe some differences from one place to another in the oceans as to the efficacy of the removal. Now, it's one possible approach, right? We're going to need many approaches to removing CO2 from the atmosphere. But one of the advantages of this is that it doesn't end up having so many also social license issues because it's offshore. It's not polluting, right? And so it's also not happening on land where people are very concerned about CO2 leaking out again and other issues. So, yeah.
So in this case, do you know scientists, or do you have any perspective on how or when we can have a balance of the carbon dioxide release and also a removal?
So, you know, the models show that essentially now we need to be having negative emissions. You know, we need to be pulling CO2 out. We need to have the technologies and we need to be using them very soon. So the longer we wait, the more costly it'll be and the more we'll need to do it. Yeah. So already there's quite a bit of research going on in the US on this, mainly in terms of removing CO2 from the atmosphere and pumping just the gas into large areas underground that are areas where oil has already been extracted from. And so pumping the CO2 back down into there. The challenge is that you can have the CO2 leaking back out because it's still a gas, right? So I think there's quite a bit of progress going on, and the US actually has a good legislation in terms of actually a lot of funding going into this. Canada is usually behind in things like this, you know, so they're not putting as much money into it, but they are very aware and increasingly aware of the importance of these negative emissions technologies. So, but by the mid-century, we've got to have this really happening. And if you look at the rate at which CO2 is continuing to climb in the atmosphere, we're really going to need these technologies. Yeah. Whether we're going to be ready or not is the other question.
因为我们时间的关系哈，那线上的参与的好朋友们好，各位贵宾，不晓得还有没有想要最后时间呢提问的？
提问的一个讯息，是不是请？
是问哪一位的 ？If any individuals, institution, corporations, or organization which intend to contribute to the issue of the climate change, what is your suggestion for that? Yeah, maybe it's.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
I think the first part of that question is very important in terms of, I think what we're seeing is that individuals, institutions, corporations, governments, you know, almost many organizations are becoming very aware of the need to, and for their own self-interest as well as for the global interest, to be reducing their emissions, to be looking at their supply chains, to be looking at how they need to adapt their own businesses or institutions to be ready for climate change, whether it's in the way that their institution operates or whether it's in the products that they produce that'll still be marketable. Because as we see more and more businesses and institutions and governments are putting in place regulations that the products they buy have to be low carbon, for example. And so it's really putting pressure on institutions and, well, on businesses. As we see, for example, in the car industry, the regulations now in many countries that by around 2030 or 2035, all new cars are going to have to be zero emissions is really changing the automobile industry. because they see it's a regulation and it's widespread. They're going to have to be ready. But I think that, so what's your suggestion for them? My suggestion for them is to be ready, be ready for the change, and to see what's, there's lots of information out there, what to do or how you can do things or what to be prepared for. I mean, accountants in businesses need to start to be able to take into account carbon tax issues, and, how are they going to change their whole business operations to be part of the green economy? Yeah. So, I think the other thing that's really important is that students see how whatever they're interested in is going to have implications for climate change. And that regardless of what business or what area of the workforce that they enter, they're going to need to know about not only climate change, but also how their particular expertise can help the institution that they work for. Yeah, that's probably enough.
We have a second question. It is known that RCEM is related to environment and CRAS is related to aging society. Do you have any suggestion or issue that both centers could collaboratively work on? Maybe.
Don't have specific answer to that question, but I would like to add a point to the carbon capture and storage. I think we can follow your question and Sipho's answer. And I got involved in that CCS project around 10 years ago in Taiwan. Yeah, and maybe the audience would like to hear what happened in Taiwan. Yeah, and I will tell the audience very briefly in Mandarin, and I will explain later longer. 我稍微讲一下刚刚提到那个二氧化碳的捕获跟封存在台湾的状况怎么样？因为刚刚他们讨论到这个议题。台湾的科技部在2011年开始到14年或15年，我们其实启动了叫能源国家型的计划，然后里面有一个主轴的计划，就是二氧化碳的捕获跟封存。那这个思维跟 Professor Zeisinger 提的不太一样，因为在 BC 呢，他们的石化燃料或温室气体的排放大部分来自于交通。那我们国家最大的来源其实是电力。就是你去看我们国家，如果我们今天不把电力分给间接的使用人的时候，我们最大的温室气体排放是来自于我们的电力部门。所以我们当初的想法就是，可不可以在电厂的旁边把二氧化碳捕获，然后封存。那因为我参与的部分是法律的部分，那这个计划大概找了全台湾30-40个学校的老师，然后一些业界的这个公司，然后也很认真的做。我们大概在12年、13年的时候，在彰滨工业区打了一口井，3000公尺，已经打好了，但是最后被要求不能做任何的实验。那我们就去跟环保署说，欧盟提到说1万公吨以下的二氧化碳的实验是不用环评的。可是因为我们的民众不清楚，我们的 NGO 不清楚，他们认为会爆炸，所以那报纸就报了。报纸报了之后呢，民意代表就说你不可以给我灌注任何的二氧化碳。所以即便到现在那口井还是在那边，那这个计划大概在2014年、15年就全部都停止了。非常的可惜，因为在那个年代，我们其实走在世界的前面。那时候也没有提到气候变迁这么严重，你一定要从空气中直接捕获。但是又过了大概10年，现在上上个月，这个工研院又重新找我提到说，因为我们政府现在还没有一个明确的方向，但是台电事务一定要做。因为有很多企业其实一直在反映，不是我燃烧了排放了非常多的温室气体，是你卖给我的电里面还有太多的温室气体，所以这个现在的这个困境。可是因为刚好今年的1月的时候，我们国家通过温室气体因应法，里面就把二氧化碳跟捕获放进去。那当初我们提的草案只是说希望他们给基金，然后去补助他们去做，让它有一个明确。但是后来这个在3读的过程中，又加了很多条件进去，要求所有的实验跟所有的计划 似乎可能都要很完整的这种环评。虽然现在还没有执法，但是因为这样一加之后呢，台电它现在也停了因为这个法通过，但是执法还没有出来，他们也不知道怎么做。所以这个还蛮有趣，就是刚好跟国际有关，然后它有一点点不一样。那我们封存的地点也不太一样我们在台湾的土地的下面，台湾很特别的地质，所以我们有这种背斜的页岩，然后下面又有深层的盐水层，就是它是像地下水一样，但是它更深，所以它完全没有流通。所以我们的设计是打到这个水里面，让它跟水还有里面的石头会有孔缝或缝隙，所以它会把它抓住，然后它还会很久很久以后它会盐化，但是还没有盐化之前呢，它会在水里面，但是基本上不会有危险。那只是说因为各种因素，所以它现在有一点停滞。那看起来政府又很想要现在又想要去推动它，或台电想要推动它，但是还是不是很容易不过这个是一个值得观察跟期待的事情，好吧？谢谢。
那因为时间的关系所以我们这个场次的话，可能就要到这边结束那非常感谢我们那个西博教授，还有各位那个演讲人演讲的贵宾。那我们这个场次就到这边结束。
那我们谢谢线上的伙伴那我想我们会把这样今天很美好的一些论坛的一些成果稍微做一点会诊跟收集。那欢迎如果线上伙伴有任何需要再做提问，我们也欢迎会后再一起共同进行研讨。那我们今天的论坛到这边结束，谢谢大家的参与，谢谢。